Letters on Savitri, edited by K.T. Sadhana. Savitri, letters written by our Lord Sri Aurobindo. Page 1. There is a previous draft, the result of the many retouchings of which somebody told you, but in that form it would not have been a magnum opus to all. Besides, it would have been a legend and not a symbol. I therefore started recasting the whole thing. Only the best passages and lines of the old draft will remain, altered so as to fit into the new frame. And Lord says, no, I do not work at the poem once a week. I have other things to do once a month perhaps. I look at the new form of the first book and many such changes as inspiration points out to me, so that nothing shall fall below the minimum height which I have fixed for it. Year 1931. Our Divine Lord says, Savitri is blank verse without enjambment except rarely each line a thing by itself and arranged in paragraphs of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 lines, rarely a long series, in an attempt to catch something of the Upanishadic and Kalidasian movement, so that is a possibility in English. You can't take that as model. It is too difficult a rhythmic structure to be a model. I shall myself know whether it is a success or not only when I have finished 2 or 3 books. But where is the time now for such a work when the supramental has finished coming down? Then perhaps year 1932. Our Lord says, don't make prophecies. How do you know that Savitri is or is going to be supramental poetry? It is not. In fact, it is only an attempt to be supramental poetry. It is not. The fact is, it is only an attempt to render into poetry a symbol of things and occult and spiritual. Year 1933. Our Lord says, possibly, but in this world certainties are few. Anyhow, in the effort to quote, I have succeeded in putting the first few hundred lines into something like a final form, which is a surprising progress and very gratifying to me, even if it brings no immediate satisfaction to you. And our Lord says, what you write about your inspiration is very interesting. There is no variable how, except that I receive from above my head and receive changes and corrections from above without any initiation by myself or labor of the brain. Even if I change 100 times, the mind does not work at that, it only receives. Formerly, it used not to be so. The mind was always laboring at the stuff of an unshaped formation. The poems come as a stream beginning at the first line and ending at the last. Only some remain with 1 or 2 changes, others have to be recast if the first inspiration was an inferior one. Savitri is a work by itself, unlike all the others. I made some 8 or 10 recasts of it, originally under the old insufficient inspiration. Afterwards, I'm altogether rewriting it, concentrating on the first book and working on it over and over again with the hope that every line may be of a perfect perfection. But I have hardly any time now for such a work. Date, or rather year 1934. Sri Aurobindo, our Lord, continues to say, that is very simple. Now, what was that very simple? He says this is in reference to a question. We have been wondering, our Lord, why should you have to write and rewrite your poetry, for instance, Savitri 10 or 12 times, when you have all the inspiration at your command and do not have to receive it with the difficulty that faces budding yogis like us? For this, our Lord Sri Aurobindo answers, I use Savitri as a means of ascension. I began with it on a certain mental level. Each time I could reach a higher level, I rewrote it from that level. Moreover, I was very particular. If parts seemed to me to come from any lower levels, I was not satisfied to leave it because it was a good poetry. All had to be as far as possible on the same mint. In fact, Savitri has not been regarded by me as a poem to be written and finished, but as a field of experimentation to see how far poetry could be written from one's own yogic consciousness, and how could that be made creative. I did not rewrite Rose of God or the sonnets, except for two or three verbal alterations made at the moment. Year 1936. Our Lord says Savitri was originally written many years ago before the mother came as a narrative poem in two parts, part 1 Earth, part 2 Beyond. These two parts are still extant in the scheme 1. Each of the 4 books, or rather part 2, consisted of 3 books and an epilogue. 12 books to an epic is a classic superstition, but the new Savitri may extend to 10 books. If much is added in the final version, it may be even 12. The first book has been lengthening and lengthening out till it must be over 2000 lines, but I shall break up the original first 4 into 5, I think. In fact, I have already started doing so. These first 5 will be, as I conceive them now, the book of birth, the book of quest, the book of love, the book of fate, and the book of death. As of the second part, I have not touched it yet. There was no climbing of plains there in the first version. Rather, Savitri moved through the worlds of night, of twilight, of day, all, of course, in a spiritual sense, and ended by calling down the power of the highest worlds of Satchitananda. I had no idea of what the supramental world could be like at that time, so it could not enter into the scheme. As for the expressing the supramental inspiration, that is a matter of the future. Year 1936. Our Lord says Savitri is represented in the poem as an incarnation of the Divine Mother. This incarnation is supposed to have taken place in far past times when the whole thing had to be opened so as to hew the ways of immortality. Year 1936. Our Lord continues to say, the poem was originally written from a lower level, a mixture perhaps of the inner mind, psychic, poetic intelligence, sublimized vital, afterwards with the higher mind, often illumined, and intuitivized intervening. Most of the stuff of the first book is new, or else the old so altered so as to be no more of what it was. The best of the old has sometimes been kept almost intact because it had already the higher inspiration. Moreover, there had been many several successive divisions of each trying to lift the general level higher and higher towards a possible overmind poetry. As it now stands, there is a general overmind influence, I believe, sometimes coming fully through, sometimes coloring the poetry of the other higher planes fused together, sometimes lifting any one of these higher planes to the highest or the psychic, poetic intelligence or vital towards them. Year 1936.